My biggest fear would be when the first comes and I don't get the rent.
I found that my tenant had dumped concrete down my toilet. Can you believe Fair Housing fined me $5,000 for that?
How do you onboard your tenants? What do you do?
I don't even know if I do it right.
If you're a landlord, don't just rent, rent perfect. The Rent Perfect podcast with property expert and private investigator, David Pickron.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode here over at the Rent Perfect podcast. I have Jake from State Farm with me today. Jake, Scott Urry, good friend of mine, insurance agent. Been there for how long, Scott?
20 years.
20 years as a State Farm insurance agent. We certainly appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I am wearing my khakis and my red shirt, so luckily it's not 3 a.m., but
those are great commercials.
We're good to go, right?
That's awesome. Hey, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today I'd like to address a little bit about renter's insurance.
I'd like that too. I think a lot of our Rent Perfect Nation, it's one thing that as a landlord myself, sometimes we say we want, but we don't demand.
Yeah.
One of those things where there's a whole process of onboarding something. We get to the end, we're happy to have our places full, but we don't say, okay, now let me see your renter's insurance policy.
Yep.
So I'm excited that we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, and I hear Rent Perfect makes it really easy, so that's really nice that you can write on the system, be able to do that for your clients.
We do, and so when a client signs up and gets approved, they can buy renter's insurance right on our site for $4.51 for just the liability portion. But we want to talk about more, and we want them to actually get content coverage. And I'm grateful you're here. I want to note that our product online is not State Farm. I wish it was because I do all my I do all my personal stuff through State Farm, and I love State Farm. But I just want to make that disclaimer. We need to change that one of these days and get State Farm to.
We'll work on that.
Absolutely. So, Scott, why in your opinion, and you're a landlord too, why do you think that we need renter's insurance?
Well, it's interesting. So, most of us have property coverage, which is the coverage for the rental dwelling. So we have coverage for the actual property. So we're thinking in our minds as landlords, well, what do I care whether they cover their stuff or not,
Right.
But what we see consistently in the industry is, several different things. First of all, in an electrical fire, let's take it as an example. A lot of times your tenants are going to look at you and say, well, wait, I didn't have anything to do with this. The house burned because of something electrically. Wasn't my fault. And now all my contents are burned. Now, legally, do we have a liability? Maybe not. Maybe we can avoid getting out of that. But we also have a tenant sitting there who maybe has been a good tenant having a really bad experience because they feel like, your house, this happened. And so really what renter's insurance does as, from a landlord perspective is it does a couple things. Number one, it allows the renter to have some kind of peace of mind that, hey, heaven forbid, if something happens, most renter's insurance, other than just like the liability stuff and that, have some semblance of a place to go. So in that electrical fire situation, they'll have a clause in there where they're going to put them up in a hotel or something like that. And that tenant's not standing there looking at you saying, oh, well, what am I supposed to do? I mean, you're going to get me a hotel.
Who's paying the Ritz-Carlton bill tonight?
That's right. And most of the time it won't be the Ritz-Carlton, but hey, at least it's a roof over their head and some things. And then they also will provide some resources as well for temporary clothing. I mean, it depends on the situation, but in a fire situation where really they could have lost everything to smoke or to the fire itself, it provides some semblance of coverage. So really what it does by demanding having renter's insurance is it takes a lot of that off of your plate. And most landlords don't understand how inexpensive it is. I mean, sometimes we feel like, I've got rents and my renter's kind of squeezing themselves to get the rent paid. Right. But really, we're talking for probably less than they buy a pizza on the weekend, having a month's worth of renter's insurance. The second piece of it from a landlord perspective is the liability piece. Heaven forbid we have a renter that has a party of some kind or something, and now there's somebody suing. Okay, even though as a landlord, I didn't have anything really to do with that. It seems like in today's world, you're going to be listed as one of the liability people on that, especially if that guy has nothing from a liability perspective. So it allows you to be a little bit insulated from that situation, and there's some resources there that maybe will avoid that situation if it can be taken care of.
Okay, so let me kind of recap and re-talk. We just talked about two concepts, but take me through take me through real quick. Say I own a fourplex. Okay, the whole fourplex burns down. One guy has renter's insurance, and the other 3 don't. Take me through kind of how would that one person be treated differently than the other 3 by paying that monthly content liability coverage.
Perfect. So I actually have an example of that. So years ago, I had a apartment fire where I had 16 units of an apartment complex, and in that apartment complex, 2 people dating, get in an argument. They've got food on the stove. Guy chases his girlfriend outside to continue the argument, and the stove catches fire and the place burns to the ground. 16 units.
Oh, 16
burned.
units.
Okay. Well, luckily, I showed up because I knew it was kind of a tragedy thing. It was close to my office, came there. In that 16 unit, one of them had renters, which was my particular client. My client, we loaded up. I got him down at the Marriott and got him taken care of, gave him some money for some food and some clothing and things to get them going and comfortable. The other 15 people that were affected ended up going down to the Red Cross, and they ended up putting him in a gym of I think it was a junior high or something like that. I don't remember exactly where they all went, but it was kind of interesting because that was probably the best marketing tool I ever had, because I received several phone calls from each of those tenants later on saying, hey, listen, I mean, that you showed up and took these people away and gave them a great situation, and we feel like we were, destitute. And it actually worked out to be a great marketing tool. And back in that time, it was early in my career, really renter's insurance was hardly ever talked about. In fact, most apartment complexes didn't demand it, where today most apartment complexes have some demand for it. So if they're demanding it, I think it's pretty reasonable for us to be able, as individual landlords, say, because it's kind of common in the industry to require that.
Right. Right. No, it is. It's common to require it. It's hard to enforce it.
That's right.
That's what the Rent Perfect system kind of enforces that. And insurance is interesting to me because you really don't see the value of insurance until you see the tragedy. Right.
Absolutely.
When life is going good, why do I need insurance? Why do I need to pay you? But all of a sudden now 16 units burned down and you're holding my hand through a tragic situation. Now all of a sudden you're a hero.
Yeah.
You're a guy taking my money until you're the hero.
Absolutely.
And then everybody else has to see it and go, oh,
yeah,
I get it.
I always use this analogy. A lot of times in insurance, we're the dentist. Nobody really likes to go to the dentist, and we're miserable when we're at the dentist. But we're sure glad the dentist exists when we've got our toothache and we're in a really bad situation. And so, one of the other things that I would recommend for sure is when you do this requiring of the renter's insurance, you can add your name as the landlord as an additional insured or additional interest, sometimes they'll call it. Wonderful thing. What that allows you to do is if there is a cancellation of non-payment or something like that, you're going to get a notification as well. So it allows that your renter can't just say, "Hey, listen, I'm going to buy 1 month's worth," and then out of sight, out of mind. It allows you to kind of have some semblance of control to be able to make sure that policy stays in force, and really for the amount of money you're paying, you're gaining a lot of peace of mind and headache in your own life. Heaven forbid something were to happen.
I think this is a good time to throw in there that you need to have this clause in your lease that we require renter's insurance. If for some reason your renter's insurance lapse, you must, comply with the lease and get it back into full force. Because if you don't have renter's insurance, we're not responsible for any content you have, anything that you have. And so I would make sure that's in your lease to make sure that you could point to that at the end as you feel guilty and they're saying, "What are you going to do? All my stuff is burned up because of your fire and your problem." Your lease says, "I'm sorry, you signed on this. This was our agreement, and you were supposed to have that covered, not me." So it really protects you. Make sure that's in your
most
lease.
of the time, when we've done it as a recommendation, in my experience, it doesn't usually happen. It just doesn't. I mean, and so, I would definitely have that clause that they do have that and that they do have to provide proof. And maybe even the clause in there to make sure that you're listed as an additional interest. And there again, it just makes the whole process easier. And if you go in with that expectation up front, it seems to be acceptable. But if we have to add it later, it becomes a little bit of a hassle sometimes.
So Scott, I really, and we touched a little bit on this, so let's really clarify this. I really require the liability portion of it.
Yep.
And in Rent Perfect, it's $4.51, right?
Yep.
I don't know what it is at State Farm, but I would recommend getting content coverage just for them, but really for me, the liability portion is so huge. And so can you give us a situation where the tenant's liability would save us from filing on our insurance policy, right?
Yep.
And we would go through their liability policy. Because I always want to know, sometimes insurance to me is like, I'm never going to use it and I never can use it. But actually, this liability portion will work when what?
Yeah. So liability piece comes into effect when there's something on the property that maybe the renter was liable for. Maybe the easiest situation, and we talk about dogs, we talk about trampolines and things like that. But let's say, for example, I'm having a get-together at my home, and something goes sideways, and all of a sudden there's somebody who's injured or there's a problem. All of a sudden in today's world, it just seems like we've got lawsuits coming at us. Well, really, you're creating a piece of insulation that allows us to say, hey, listen, go to that party's insurance originally. I didn't have anything to do with it. I was a landlord. I was at my home.
I didn't invite him over.
I didn't have anything to do with that. But if there is not a liability piece and there is some semblance of liability or someone's injured severely or things like that, they're always going to come in and try and get what they can. I mean, that's kind of just the world we live in. And so this allows you to kind of insulate yourself with just the liability piece. And, customarily, it all just depends on, in today's world, we individually rate all kinds of stuff. But, you're paying, let's say right around $5, for that liability piece. To add the other pieces that include, getting them to the hotel, covering their stuff so they're not looking at you, you're really talking another $5 a month. I mean, sometimes it'll be $7 or $8.
So decent content, full package policy, $10, $15 a month.
$15 a month. That's very, very common for just a basic policy. And there again, it just takes a lot of the burden off of you as the landlord, because most of us, we have hearts, we have kids, we have, we have hearts. And when that person's saying, hey, listen, there was an electrical fire or there was something I had no control and lightning struck the home, they're going to kind of look at us sometimes, and us as human beings are going to feel sorry for those people. And, we do. And that's just what it is. And the reality of it is, that at 10 or 12 or $15 a month they're paying, and they're paying it. Obviously, I'm not paying it, but they're paying it. But if I can demand that, now I look like a great guy, and I don't really have to get knee deep in it. And it just insulates everything, I think, a little bit from a liability perspective, as well as some of the property coverages now.
So I get a phone call probably about a year ago, and my tenant says, hey, the home is totally flooded. The whole half of the house, the bedrooms, the bathroom's totally flooded. Coming out of the bathroom. Not a phone call you want to get, right? I'm not a full-time landlord. I've got other things I'm doing, and right in the middle of my day of doing other things, and now I've got to stop everything and deal with this water crisis, right?
Yeah.
It's going underneath the floorboards. It's going into the bedrooms. The carpet's soaked, and so I'm thinking, man, where is this water coming from? So I drop everything. I head over there, and I go into this home and kind of go back to where it is, and I'm slopping through, water on the tile. And I'm looking for a leak. I'm like, I can't see where this water's coming from. Did you turn the water off? No, I didn't turn the water off. I'm like, do you know how this water got here? And she's like, well, my 3-year-old dumped something down the toilet and then thought it was fun to continue to flush the toilet while it overflowed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, not to be rude or anything, but first thing is look at all this water. How long has she been flushing this toilet? What were you doing?
That's right.
This is a half an hour of flush. Well, they had renter's insurance.
Yep.
And I explained to him that, listen, if it would have been a leaky pipe, but if it would have been something that broke, I'd be more than happy to cover it. But this is your daughter who's causing this issue. This is your problem. Mm-hmm. And so they went ahead and filed the claim through their renter's insurance and covered it.
Yep.
And they were probably asking, why are we covering a flood? That's the landlord's. But when they heard the story that it was who caused it and how it would happen,
absolutely,
they wrote the check and figured it out. And so for me, I've had personal experience with having my tenants have a liability policy that saved me. Now, I've also talked to a lot of people around this country that told me stories about dogs knocking over people down the steps in the front, right?
Oh, yeah.
Kids hurting themselves on trampolines, people falling down stairways, all kinds of different things that actually this liability will kick in or should kick in. You never know, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
yeah, you don't. It all depends on the
everyone's going to file
circumstances.
claims and point fingers, but it's certainly, you said insulate yourself. And if it's free to me and it's cheap to my residents, I'm just going to require it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's prudent. And you have a great example there. What a great example of a liability claim. I mean, basically, you're liable because someone in your household, caused the damage. And so that's a great example there again of just knowing, and there again, I mean, a lot of our renters are month to month, right? So had they not had the renter's insurance, and now you're looking at them saying, hey, we got a $10,000 claim here, a lot of your renters just going to look at you with starry-eyed saying, well, sorry.
Yeah, I'm filing that claim on my insurance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which then might raise my rate on that particular property. It might raise my rate on other properties. I don't know exactly how that's going to affect me. I just know that insurance companies don't write out $10,000, $20,000 checks and then don't get their money back somehow.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And there again, it's insulating our own situation where people are liable for the things they do, which, right. That's life. And if it were my issue, I would be liable. I would certainly have taken, had it been a leaky pipe or things like that, then you would have taken care of it on your own end. And so there again, it's an insulation is really all it is. We're insulating ourselves. And as a lot of us landlords that own homes and stuff like that, we have other jobs, we have other businesses, we have other things that we're doing. And, these things can sure put a wrench in all your other stuff and tamper your businesses and stuff like that. Based on a loss like this. So it just really helps you insulate all that.
You do make an interesting point, because in my particular situation, when I found out the daughter was flushing the toilet, it almost didn't become my problem anymore. It wasn't on my shoulders. Yeah. It was back to them. Hey, sorry. And then I could go about my day and not have this burden of, hey, did they show up? Did they dry out the house? Did they put the back? Did the carpet company come? All of a sudden I'm like, hey, you're dealing with that whole situation. You just saved me tons of hours of time and heartache, because I just put that responsibility on you. So not to keep, going back over
in a liability situation. I mean, if you have an incident at your home, and now we have, attorneys and different people knocking on our door, looking at us saying, hey, listen, even though it wasn't your fault, we're still listing you or trying to hold you liable. Mm-hmm. There again, what kind of effect is that going to have on your other businesses, your life? Just even trying to protect yourself to say, hey, listen, I have anything to do with this. I mean, this is nothing I had anything to do with. You're still going to have to deal with it. And there's certain things that it's going to take your time, kind of what you're saying. And there's just kind of a peace of mind knowing that, hey, listen, they have the coverage. They've paid for the coverage. And go there first. And if something else comes about, I'll certainly deal with that. But it just makes it a little bit easier and lets us do what we do best to have the resources to buy that rental home and buy another one. So.
Now, here's something else I think about too is, they don't have liability insurance. They're afraid to tell me about it. They get out their towels and their fans, and my floorings got mold underneath it, and they move out. And I never knew this happened. And all of a sudden, my place is damaged. And it's damaged at a pretty good point. These renters that I had don't have $10,000 to write me a check.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it gives them a way out too, to make sure my home is properly taken care of. So there's just so many little things about it that, I don't know why we just absolutely don't put our foot down and demand it. I think we should. I do.
Yeah.
And I want to convince, my Rent Perfect Nation to do the same thing. Yeah, and we make it easy for you.
Let me give you one other suggestion as well. I just had this incident come up recently. Some of us rent homes to multiple tenants. Sometimes you'll have single people in there that'll have 3 and 4 people in there. We do want to make sure in our contracts that we're telling them that each individual person has to have the renter's coverage. Now, they can go to an insurance company and together be on a policy and pay. They can. But what happened in a current situation is, they had a couple tenants. One of them had the renters thinking it was for everybody. Well, in the insurance industry, we cover the named insured. We got to know who's insuring, because we love to know as many facts as we can.
Right.
In this particular case, she had another tenant had come in and got upset and did a lot of the stuff that you kind of had talked in your intro, ruining the home. Mm-hmm. And obviously this person left and was all upset and took off. Well, there's really nothing to go after. And here these other people that are sharing the home are sitting there saying, well, we can't live, we can't function. Well, how's this going to happen? And so unfortunately, now it turns back to the landlord, because he's dealing with, because he has a house that's unusable, and we have no way to go back and liability hold this person because there's nothing to hold them. So, just a tidbit of something I've had come up recently. Make sure that if we have multiple tenants, that they do have their own named insured policies.
I think that is great insight. I don't rent by the room, but
Yeah.
so many people nowadays with this, this whole Airbnb concept of, hey man, I can make more money renting by the room and being under the same roof. That's great advice. Every single person you rent to, even if they're under the same roof, they each individually need their policy.
Absolutely.
Now, Scott, if the one that did the damage in that scenario had renter's insurance, would the renter's insurance cover that damage?
Absolutely. It's liability. You can.
And who would file that claim? Because doesn't the renter have to file his own claim, or could you go directly to their renter's insurance company and say, this is what they did, I want to file a claim?
Absolutely you can.
You could.
Absolutely you can. Yeah, I mean, in a good example, this is a lot of time on the auto insurance side. Someone will hit me in their car, and I call their insurance company and say, listen, they hit me. And for some reason, people think, well, if I don't call, I'm not liable. Well, the reality of it is, you're still liable. Now, we have certain restrictions and things we have to do to reach out to that particular client.
Right.
But, after a period of time, we say, hey, listen, if that client can't call us back to tell us kind of their side, then we're assuming that there is some semblance of liability.
So the renter's insurance works the same way. I can file a claim even though I'm not the person on the policy.
Absolutely. And they're going to reach out to that person and try and get their side and make sure that they, that there isn't something going on here. But if that person decides not to call back or something, they're still liable for it. I mean, there's still a liability there. So,
well, I think you've given us so much information. We need to take it and digest it, and it really just comes down to trusting that you need renter's insurance and having a system in place that makes sure that your tenants do have this, at least the liability point. But we really like contents covered too. But that's up to them.
Yeah.
Scott, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thanks for
appreciate all those years of expertise and really digging in on why do we need renter's insurance.
That's been great, and I appreciate it. And a lot of the things I talk about are just general insurance information. Some of them apply to, the company I work for. But there again, just get it taken care of. That's what I would tell you. I mean, as much as I love my company and I represent it, and I think the world of it. Just make sure you've got some semblance, and I promise you that if you'll do this, it really just makes our lives a little easier as landlords and makes the process better.
So no matter who your insurance agent, run all this by them. Make sure what we're saying is in line with their philosophy and what they think. And I think with that general information, they would agree with most of it. I don't think we've said anything that's out of school here. But make sure they have renter's insurance. And until next time, continue to rent perfect.